Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about ethical considerations in human research. So I'm going to cover lots of the ethical considerations, but this video will not be inclusive of all possible ethical considerations and things that you need to have an eye on when you're conducting research. So first, I want to talk about the key principles of ethical research. So the first is value. That means that when we are conducting research with human participants, that we need to be providing some kind of value. So value to the participants, value to society based on the results that we collect that from our study, value to the scientific discipline. So there needs to be value provided to others other than the researcher themselves. So that could be in terms of health benefits, new knowledge, or other things. Scientific validity, that is the idea that when we're conducting research with human participants, we do not want to be wasting their time. So it is unethical to conduct a methodologically unsound study that would waste the participants' time. So to be the most ethical, we would have the most methodologically sound study designed so that we can be pretty confident that the results of our study are going to be worthwhile and worth the time of the participants. Fair subject selection means that participants should be selected fairly without bias or favoritism. Now, we still need to follow whatever strategy we identify that we are going to use for selection of our participants. So it doesn't mean that every person has an equal chance at being included in the study, because there still should be delimitations set. So if it's a study only looking at females, then males would not be eligible. Okay, so fair subject selection doesn't mean that just everybody gets to participate, but it means that within how we've identified who our participants are, that subjects will have equal opportunity to be included in the study. So one person isn't being selected because the researcher likes them better, or for example. And then favorable risk-benefit ratio. It means that the risk to the participants should be as minimal as possible at all times, and the benefits should be as maximal as possible at all times, and that the benefits must outweigh the risks. Okay, so the benefits for the participant must outweigh the risks to the participant, and the risk must be as low as possible, and the benefits as high as possible. Informed consent means that somebody is not considered a participant in your study until they have been thoroughly informed of the research, and the participant or that person gives voluntary informed consent to participate, and then they become a participant. And then finally, respect for enrolled subjects refers to the right that participants have to be treated with respect. They have the right to withdraw from the research at any time, and they should be informed of that right. So participants are never forced to continue participation in a study. They are only continuing participation by their own choice. Their personal information should be protected. So that's a matter of respect for the participant. So personal information should be protected, de-identified, remain confidential, whatever procedures you have in place. And the participants should be familiar with the plan for how that data, how the information about them will be handled over the course of the research. And their well-being should be monitored. So if over the course of the research, it seems like someone's well-being is at risk, or that participant is suffering from something, maybe one of the risks came true, maybe something happened, that well-being should be monitored of those individuals, and that those individuals should be cared for in whatever appropriate way possible. Vulnerable populations in human research, that refers to people who are relatively or absolutely incapable of protecting their own interests. Okay, so relatively incapable simply means that they are in some kind of vulnerable situation where they don't have full autonomy, they don't have full control over their situation, whatever it might be, and that they're to some extent at the mercy of someone else. So prisoners in a prison system, employees within a corporation, students in a classroom. So it's not any failing of the person or their character or anything like that. It's just simply by circumstance, some groups of people are sort of at the will of others. So students are at the will of their teacher or others at the institution. Employees are at the will of their superiors within their organization. And then, of course, there are those who are mentally disabled, pregnant women, those with less education. It could be those who speak a different language than the one that the researcher is communicating in. So there are lots of examples. So I put a few examples here, but the list goes on. So it's just anybody who is in a somewhat vulnerable position or where they're under the power of someone else. So those groups would be considered vulnerable populations. And it means that they receive extra protections when it comes to human research. So like if research is being conducted at a prison, for example, let's say the prisoners are the participants in a research study. Well, of course, informed consent is critical in conducting ethical research, but somebody who is a prisoner might be more likely to give consent to a study that maybe they wouldn't have consented to had they not been incarcerated. So that's the key difference here is, will somebody in one of these groups be more compelled to participate because of their vulnerable situation than they would be if they had full, complete autonomy? And so they get extra protections, and the IRB will have you discuss those protections and what will be in place and why you think that this is ethically sound. And they may have additional requirements. They may not accept your request and so on, because these populations are especially protected. Okay, risk in human subjects research. Risk is the probability of harm occurring as a result of participation in a study. So as I mentioned, risk should always be as minimal as possible, but there will always be some amount of risk. So even minimal risk is still something. There's still some amount of risk. So minimal risk is considered the anticipated harm is not greater than what is encountered in daily life. So minimal risk means that when they participate in this study, there isn't more risk to any kind of harm than there would be just them going about their daily lives. The risk will never be zero, just like going through your daily life. There's no risk of zero. Things happen all the time. Okay, but minimal risk means it's equivalent to just daily life. Social risk means if participation may lead to social consequences like stigmatization, discrimination, or prejudice. Okay, so if participants are in your study and they're answering questions and they're maybe sharing vulnerable, sensitive information about themselves, and if participation in their study could put them at risk of being stigmatized within their community, being discriminated against, and so on, then that is considered social risk. Psychological harm in this context is considered maybe stress, depression, confusion, guilt, embarrassment, loss of self-esteem, and those are just examples. So we could list on and on and on potential emotions and things that could take place psychologically with the participant when they participate in research. And those are examples of potential psychological harms. Economic risk is if participation may negatively affect employment, insurance coverage, or academic status. So if they're putting any of those sorts of things at risk, that's considered an economic risk. So take, for example, if we're studying binge drinking in college students, as an example. Now, for college students to participate and really fully tell the truth and maybe admit that they drink, then if they're underage, then that would be considered academic or economic risk and maybe even physical risk. Because if they are drinking underage and they're admitting that within the context of your study, there's economic risk because if that information were to get out, which it shouldn't, because you should be keeping that information confidential and anonymous and protected. But there is risk associated with those participants sharing, and they could lose their academic status, for example, if they are caught for underage drinking. Or there could be tickets involved, there could be legal action. I don't know if you get jail for underage drinking or not, but that if you did, that could potentially be a physical risk if they're risking their freedom. So physical risk is if participation may result in physical harm, like in the case of domestic violence, or participation in illegal activities like gangs or drugs. So if a participant, by participating in your study, could be at increased risk, like if their significant other found out that they were sharing about their domestic violence situation at home, then they might be at greater risk of increasing domestic violence. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.